My name is Maya Horgan Famodu. Despite my very American accent, I too am Nigerian, half Nigerian. Currently living in Lagos. Coming to New York for this VentureCrush event. Thank you, Ed, so much, and the Lowenstein team for putting this on, and FCP for putting this on as well. I assume there's an affiliation.
I mean,
all of it. Everything
sure.
all together.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. As far as my background, I launched Ingressive Advisory, an advisory firm that assisted global technology companies and VC funds to enter and operate across sub-Saharan Africa in 2014. And then 2017, with a number of our clients from this business, we launched Ingressive Capital Fund 1, which is a $10.2 million first fund. 80% of our limited partners run later stage investment vehicles. The idea is that we could market make, investing in the pre-seed and then passing the deals on to our later stage LPs, which we've actually been doing recently through syndication. And last year, two things happened. We had our first liquidity event. So our very first portfolio company, Paystack, sold to Stripe for a couple $100 million. And we also launched Ingressive for Good, which is our nonprofit arm. We do technical training, talent placement, and micro and university scholarships. We've trained about 66,000 people in the last 1 year. Our last training cohort of 3,000 members had about 80% employment day of graduation. So the day people graduated, they got jobs. And so the organization is committed to increasing the earning power and employability of African youth. It also creates a fantastic pipeline of sourcing and placing talent into our portfolio companies and those of VCs across the continent, because there is quite a dearth of technical talent as companies are scaling rapidly and wild stuff is happening. This year, we've launched the raise for our second fund, Ingressive Capital's $50 million Fund 2.
And you said you trained 66,000?
Yes.
People?
Yes. Humans. Africans, actually. 21 countries. Like last year alone, we launched. So we do the training ourselves, and we also source different technical training programs that have very high employment at graduation rates, and we sponsor their whole technical training cohorts. So through a collaboration of either us training directly or us sponsoring and providing scholarships to students.
And how many do you train directly?
A fraction of that. So it's a minority percentage. So for the most part, we do work with we let the people be the best of the best at what they do, which is in countries across the continent, we find the top 1 to 3 organizations, and we sponsor their cohorts. Like last month, I believe it was, we provided 1,000 scholarships to women to learn product management and design at Genisa Institute. And so it's a technical training school.
Amazing. That's great.
I'm Kirby Harris. I'm the co-founder and managing partner of Base Ventures. We are a seed stage fund based in Berkeley, California. Our first fund, we started in 2012. We just raised our third fund, just closed it a couple weeks ago. We've made roughly 100 investments over the last 10 years in a bunch of companies around the United States, and we focus on investing in really outstanding individuals and talent spread throughout the country. And but about 70% of our investments have been based in California, since we are based in California, and that's kind of where our network is.
What are a couple of the companies that people might have heard of?
You might use Ali Vitamins, gummy vitamins. It was sold to Unilever 2019 for a few $100 million. I don't know if you've been watching this space race with if you've heard of so you've seen Richard Branson and Bezos. We have a company called Space Perspective. It's a balloon that takes people up $125,000 for 4 hours of an experience versus the 10 to 15 minutes that you get on the competitors. Or it's not even competitive. If someone's paying $250,000 for an 18-minute ride, they probably have another $125,000 for a 2 or 3 hour ride. So we don't see it as competitive. We see it as kind of everybody being in this journey to bring space tourism to the masses.
So I have to ask, as a seed fund, what made you conclude that people, like consumers, would pay $125,000 to get 18 minutes into the air and then come down? Like, why is that a good bet?
So Virgin made that play, 10 years ago, and they sold 700 seats over the last 5 or 6 years. So we knew if there are 700 people that are willing to do it, and they basically stopped selling tickets when they got to 700. So the market is fairly proven that there's an appetite for this kind of experience. So yeah, we took the
from the please continue.
No, go ahead.
So from an African continent perspective, where you have 700 consumers signing up, does that prove out a market for you? How do you think about numbers like that?
As far as it comes to space travel, no, not yet.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, certainly, I understand the global market for space travel. I think we should get we're still working on our infrastructural needs on the continent as far as step one.
So
Yeah.
you
Let
have
me
a
just give
question of
solid
700
internet.
people. You say 700 people doesn't.
No, I didn't say it doesn't. I'm asking if it does.
Oh, so 700 people, they paid up front $250,000.
And you want some of that.
So there's 700 people
I like
who
that math.
said yes, and they said they paid all the money up front, and you're not going to take off for a decade. So there's
Yeah.
definitely demand, and they stopped selling seats at some point. So the demand is clearly there, and a lot of people don't want to just do a rocket and get the bejesus scared out of you when you can float up in a balloon and have a glass of wine at the top and,
Yeah.
and hang out.
And for us, we're not focused on necessarily these nice to haves, though some people are saying that they're, essential. Space travel, a lot of our businesses, because there's 1.2 billion people on the continent, 200 million in Nigeria, 20 million in the biggest city, in Lagos. And the solutions that we're looking at are typically high volume, low margin opportunities. So not selling $125,000 per seat for anything, but certainly looking at, market sizes like, in the first 3 years of, or 2 years of one of our companies launching, just the 1.5 million year one, 3 million year two, the rapid
3 million people.
Yes, the rapid growth that can happen when you have the highest rates of mobile penetration. Like there are more mobile users in Africa than the US and UK combined, and that's just a fraction of these countries who are even online now, or even have access to internet. And so we're thinking about the model differently, but still benefiting from the same macroeconomic factors of like the fastest growing consumer classes in the world, the youngest populations in the world. A lot of stuff's happening.
And those are some of the same dynamics that caused a lot of both venture funds and the LPs that invest in venture funds to decide that China was an extraordinary opportunity. Why are they not all flooding to the continent as an extraordinary opportunity? Because if you look at the flow of dollars from limited partners, from institutional investors into venture funds themselves, Africa gets consistently overlooked just as a percentage of global dollars.
I think that's certainly an indication of like what has happened historically. But even in the next 2 weeks, you're going to see some very prominent household name VC funds who are leading Series A, Series B growth rounds of African companies in a way that they haven't before. If you look at technology, infrastructure, like telecommunications, fiber was laid in the 90s. So we had phones in the 90s. And then the first, version 1.0 of financial services firms, like switching systems. So if you put your ATM in an ATM, or if you put your card in an ATM machine, it can take out from a different bank. That came in the early 2000s. And so like, if you're looking at the growth of tech enablement, it's really only happened in the last 5 years. Like in 2016, there was only $129 million that came into all of African tech. And yeah, that was also supply and demand. But now this year, last year we're well over $4 billion. It's been a 2x every year since then. So to say yes, historically, institutional capital hasn't necessarily come to the tech space in Africa, but if you're looking at what's happening now year on year, that's rapidly changing.
So 120 some odd million in 2016, more than 4 billion in 2020, the pandemic year.
Yes.
And
we're getting close to $1 billion as of Q1, and so it's all there's always like a leg of information flow. It's a little bit more opaque in the markets, but I wouldn't be surprised if we were close to 2x this year as well.
And we've also got, people talk a lot about unicorns, although they've become remarkably common, like household pets in the States, particularly in San Francisco, where it's like your emotional support animal is now a unicorn, right? So, but on the continent, we're seeing like companies like Flutterwave and a whole bunch of others are actually raising these big rounds and getting these elevated valuations. Are we going to see 10 companies in the next 24 months? Are we going to see 20 companies in the next 24 months that click in at that billion or more valuation?
Absolutely. I think that's a factor of two things. It's, just the maturity, the average age or the average time it takes a startup to get to $1 billion valuation is 7 to 10 years. And so we're seeing the ecosystem is going to soon be 7 years old. And so it will now be that time. We'll have had enough time to develop the first stage of $1 billion companies on the continent. But yes, even Sequoia just opened up shop in Egypt, and we have Y Combinator has done over 60 deals on the continent so far, and we're seeing major institutional investors, or the who's who of venture capital, even in the U.S., actively allocating a percentage of their capital to investing in African tech in ways that they haven't done before. So yeah, I would say particularly in the developing health tech sector, financial services, which we're already seeing the $1 billion valuations, InterSwitch and Flutterwave, as you mentioned, and several others, and meaningful M&A activity, because these consumer, like the fastest growing consumer classes, the fastest growing rates of technology, so like tech enablement, the largest populations in the world, even global technology companies are using local acquisitions as their market entry strategy. So these global funds or firms, companies that want to get into Africa are doing so strategically by buying assets, and even upwards of those 500 million to billion valuations.
And that's why Stripe acquired Paystack.
Yes.
Right, because they weren't going to build it on the continent. They decided to go in through an incumbent leader.
Exactly, and frequently they can't. There are so many infrastructural complications of building on the continent, and also the nuances as far as it comes to even the consumers talk less of the regulation from country to country. It takes a lot, many years, even for somebody who's like from the country, building exclusively in the country. It's complicated, and so it makes a lot more sense and saves a lot more money to acquire assets that have already spent the last decade trying to figure out these local consumer dynamics and local market dynamics than trying to start from scratch.
So let's talk about Paystack for a minute. That was your first investment in Ingressive One, 2017.
Yes.
How much of the fund at the time did you put into the first round in Paystack?
100% of what we had at the time. So we started my first LPA that was signed. I said
limited partnership agreement.
Oh yes, partnership agreement. So the first docs that the first investor signed, I said, don't even send me any money. Send it all directly to Paystack. So at the time, our first investor just wired the funds directly to Paystack. I was like, I believe in this company. Everything that we have over the next couple months is going straight to Paystack.
Was it super competitive? Or were you in a hurry to get money over there?
Yes, for multiple reasons. We knew that they were going to raise. We definitely wanted to get in before the next major raise. And at the time, I would say early in the day, there were many more opportunities than accessible capital. So it wasn't that competitive, but the golden children who had gone, like Paystack was the first to participate in Y Combinator from the continent. Yeah. And so those who had presented at Demo Day in the US, though, there were less of an appetite for Africa, still there were more than if it was exclusively on the continent.
Yeah.
And Paystack participated in YC in 2017?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so just like for framing, this is like Vegas style, I've been out all night drinking, I'm putting all my chips right here on this one bet.
Yeah.
Except in your case, 4 years later, it was the single largest acquisition of a venture-backed company in Nigeria ever, which is extraordinary.
Well, InterSwitch. We can't forget about InterSwitch, which received $200 million from Visa, and is now at about $1 billion valuation and listing on the London Stock Exchange. But they are sort of the banking infrastructure that was founded in 2004.
Strategic investment, not acquisition.
Yes.
Okay, so you can erode your own credentials all you want, except no, it was still the largest ever acquisition in Nigeria. Okay. Okay, so congratulations. And you invested again later.
Yes.
How long after?
Shortly after. It was actually quite back to back. We put in our initial investment at a very great valuation and then did an immediate follow-on.
Like 3 months later?
Yes.
Okay, so just like high beta investing. So,
I mean, if you met the founders, there's no so we strongly believe that it requires somebody who's either indigenous founders or people who've spent extended time in the local market to understand the nuances of building in Africa, because it's very unique, plus having the international standard technical talent, and being humble. Like these guys, if you meet them, you just, yeah.
So we're going to tie this to Blavity in a second, okay. And I'll put you on the spot, Carolina, just because I think you actually might know this or you can figure it out. But Y Combinator 2017, that means that Paystack was at Demo Day and presented and stood up in a room full of venture investors who came with pre-vetted companies and said, this one, we're issuing term sheets or we're writing checks, but not this one. So I don't know, how many VCs do you think sat in a Y Combinator demo day in 2017 at any one point in time? 100? 200? How many were in the room? 300? 400? Yeah. Right? Like if that had been a plane full of VCs, we would have lost like 15% of the market that day, right? Mm-hmm. They're all in the room. Mm-hmm. How many of them joined you in the Paystack deal?
In the next formal round of the Paystack deal, like their formal post-YC presentation, Tencent, Stripe actually strategically invested in that round. So a number of strategic investors after we did our initial investment.
But no US VCs?
Oh, I guess there, no, not that I'll need to get back on that one.
Okay, so just like everybody saw it, and Tencent, not US, and a strategic, and Stripe, US, but a strategic, said, wow, and you said wow, but like hundreds of US VCs sitting in the room were like, not this one.
And well, I guess Y Combinator, if you call them a...
Yeah, sure.
Yes.
Okay, and so Blavity is in 500 startups, and lots of people look at Blavity. 500 startups writes like 1 million checks a day, right? And so you invested. Yeah. Who else invested in the seed round in Blavity? And can you talk a little bit about Blavity?
I know. Ooh, can I say?
Sure. I mean, don't trust me, but sure.
I know Charles King did at Macro. And now I guess it's Mac now, but at the time it might have just been Charles, not even Macro. I don't know who else as a VC. It's been a minute since I checked out the cap table.
Yeah, Harlem Capital.
Harlem, yeah.
I'll give you a hint. It is a largely black set of VCs that invested in that round. So it just means and I don't know how many people actually saw the demo day for 500 startups when Blavity presented, but I'm assuming it's hundreds.
Yeah, hundreds. Yes, it was. And I was actually asked to say, hey, here's a list of people who are in 500 startups. Who do you want to talk to? And I picked out 5 companies. And I think I want to say Elizabeth Yin was there, and she helped me kind of curate a list of folks I should talk to after post demo day or pre or post demo day, and Morgan was on that list, and a short conversation, and well, not Morgan, but a lot the way Morgan felt about the founders of this. After you talked to her, you had to be on the cap table, and that was the essence of our investment in Black.
So I just checked in with Shola, and the other I'm allowed to say is Comcast Ventures Black Fund, because Comcast invested a certain amount in all of the Black founders that graduated from Y Combinator. So that was the only U.S. fund at the time. And
Comcast Ventures also invested in Blavity. So if you're indexing Black-led companies, you're going to pick winners.
Mm-hmm. Seems the case.
Guys, yeah. And it doesn't take a lot of checks because that 2017 YC class. I mean, there's probably 6, maybe 10 between the continent and U.S.-based Black-led companies. Probably 10 and 500, probably a few more, but call it 15. So you didn't have to write a lot of checks to get everybody if that's what you want to do, especially back in 2017. Might be a little different today, but back then it was. Yeah.
So you're writing checks inside the U.S.
Yes.
And you talked to me a little bit about a Black discount.
Yes. We as a group, we joke about it and know it's there and know it's real and know.
What is it?
That you can invest, or that Black companies, until they hit a certain point, especially companies that are serving, Black founders, serving the Black market, aren't as desirable, and they quite frankly get a lower valuation. There's a point where things kind of the delta shrinks, but that's after it's proven that there is a market and there's something there. But typically, if a C Series A round, you're going to get what we call a Black discount, that a lower valuation than your peers based on the market, the demographic you're serving.
And how do you think about that as an investment thesis?
I don't think about it as a thesis. It's just a fact of the market. There's a bunch of facts in the market, and that's one of the facts that are in the market. It's been there, and
is it changing at all?
I think the delta is probably shrinking a little bit, but because of the a bunch of other systemic issues, even if you don't have to tie it to necessarily Black, but it's schools, companies that you can work at, all these places that aren't necessarily as diverse, and where venture investors like to write checks and will give you a higher valuation based on your employment at a large tech firm. We don't, by and large, we haven't existed there, over the last decade. So that's changing. They're trying to change it. I don't know how effective it is, but yeah, because of all those reasons, but because of systematic reasons, and
So Ulili from Kapor Capital in the chat has written don't tell them our secrets. And I understand that is a little tongue-in-cheek, but there is also this, like, if we know about it, that market imperfection, that systemic bias should actually evaporate. And I say evaporate because, heaven forbid, it should be deleted with intentionality. And evaporation happens as a matter of nature, right? I feel like we should be telling the secret because maybe it will spur some additional dollars, and I'm wondering how fleeting things like the Comcast Black Fund, those kinds of initiatives. And kudos to Comcast for doing it early. And I know that in New York, Kai Bond, who is an advisor to Ingressive, was actually running diversity dollars at Comcast as a VC, and is now running a terrific fund that is sports related as well, courtside, in which I've been an LP for years as well. But how fleeting are those dollars, and how do you think about your co-investors when you're looking at funds like SoftBank's $100 million initiative to invest in Black and brown founders, which I understand they're about halfway deployed on that?
Well, for us, I mean, I started before Africa Tech was cool. So if I finish there, I mean, I hope not, but we've weathered we've weathered a few storms before we started in a storm. So like that is why we strategically select LPs who can write direct checks and co-invest with us and support those portfolio companies and have long-term vested interest in the continent. So like when we onboard LPs, that's a core part of the questions we're asking, the information we're trying to gather. And whether or not there's a dip in the market, you can't deny the radical, like significantly outsized growth that's happening on the continent. It might not be cool, but it's still going to be the 6 of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world. You can't deny it. So it'll be there for a while.
What are the 6?
It depends on the various recession cycles that happen on the continent, but within sub-Saharan Africa, I mean the key markets that we are looking at, Nigeria is either way up there or not. Goes a little bit like this. Ghana, pretty stable, and if you're looking at the stability of the currency, the Ghanaian cedi was ranked the strongest currency next to the USD. So they're doing great things there. Egypt, as it's continuing to develop its manufacturing sector, is increasing as well. Ethiopia, I anticipate, watch out for them over the next 2 years as they're continuing, or as they're finally privatizing their telco sector. Really exciting things happening there. Kenya, and Rwanda, a little bit slower, but incredible ease of doing business. Very developed technology sector. And then you have the wild ones like, DRC and other places where technology isn't as developed yet. And I'd say maybe hold off on a couple years, but they've had wild and unprecedented economic growth.
The continent has a lot of demographic tailwinds with the young population. And I remember reading something probably 5-10 years ago about the next boom is on the continent, and actually trying to figure out a way to access capital into the continent, and I couldn't.
Hello. Yeah, no, Nigeria, 50% of the population is under 20 years old. 200 million people, half of them, 75% of them under the age of 35. That's not, however you want to look at it, it's really not going anywhere.
Alex, did you have a question?
I'm totally fascinated. I did a lot of reading on payment infrastructure in Africa, and there's supposed to be a trust. I have 2 questions actually, if I can ask. There's actually a trust network that people send money through either Rogue or I've heard. So this is what I'm asking. that people send, and it's like Western Union, but through people, and I don't know if that exists.
Yeah. So, I mean, it depends on which country and how competent their Ministry of Finance and CBN is as far as making ease of or like facilitating remittances. But it's done a couple of ways. So yeah, there's the sort of the way that you've explained it. There's an increased usage of cryptocurrency, and so going from fiat to fiat, leveraging crypto. So like Nigeria has the highest rate of peer-to-peer or Bitcoin transactions in the world, and
so far is the app that you were talking about, is it replacing that trust network and that way of trust transferring, or is it on top of it, layered on top?
I wouldn't say that there's one app. I would say that it's relatively decentralized. Like the difference of the continent is the decentralization. So there's one, the usage of cryptocurrencies, two, the usage of the Western unions and traditional banking platforms, three, the asset. There's alternative ways of either by buying public equities and using that as a means of currency, or even having assets in one country and saying, hey, I'll exchange this for you in the village, putting this in this person's bank account. So we do what we can.
No, that's so fascinating because we sort of take it for granted, like how easy it is to like Venmo someone, and to like transfer money from PayPal.
Mm-hmm.
And also, my second question, if I can ask another one, I heard that Square, the POS system, Jack Dorsey's company, is actually really active in Africa, and they're super focused on that. Is that true? Do you know their level of engagement? Do you know?
I can't speak for Square's activities or their intention on the continent, but I know that only 25% of Africans even have access to proper banking, and so there's a huge market opportunity. And companies like Paystack that specifically provide services for SMEs and MSMEs to accept payments outside of the POS machine, I mean, that's certainly taken off. So I can say the market is definitely there. I'm not sure of their specific strategy.
So when you're talking about fintech in Africa, there's a lot about inclusion, but I also wouldn't want people to walk away from this discussion thinking that fintech is the only super exciting sector. So if you want to talk about a company like 54 Gene and what they're doing, because that's another company that you're excited about, what's going on there?
Yeah, so one of our portfolio companies actually it's closing their Series B, 54 Gene, which is
unannounced until just now, apparently.
I mean, I'm no details. They're doing really big things. They are genetic banking, so they're biobanking, and yeah, I can answer any specific questions.
What are they banking?
A third of human DNA comes from the African genome, and right now for pharmaceutical companies, they're not really en masse testing on Black bodies, but then you have 1 billion plus people and Black people around the world that are consuming these drugs that have only been tested on Western, I guess, DNA or Western genetics, and so they're synthesizing the African genome and using it for drug discovery purposes. And advancing medicine on the continent, and it's never been done before. There's no other genetic banking company that exists at scale in Africa. And
who are some of your co-investors in that company?
IFC's fund Adjuvant. It's a Y Combinator company as well. There are a number of big funds from around the world. And
trust, because in the States, we've done a really terrible job at building trust on medical issues in the Black community, right? How is that working in Africa? And that's another example of a company that is co-located in the States and in Africa, correct?
Yeah, well, the founder and the founding team are indigenous to Nigeria. They're working with a lot of African governments and individuals to ensure that sort of trust and safety. And also, when you're testing the medication on the people for whom it will be used. Even everything from malaria tablets, like where does this come from, and where are the majority of consumers of those types of medications? And so as far as precision medicine, it's doing something that's never been done.
So can you talk a little bit about a thesis that you're pursuing, or a company that you're thinking about, or companies that you're thinking about for, you just closed this new fund, you've got fresh capital to deploy. What's exciting to you?
There are things from security to space have been themes that we've been investing in and been interested in and looking to deploy capital. Given that how much of our life is moving into the digital realm, and how many more points of access we have, but also how many more points of access kind of the bad guys have to our information, and how many more places our information is stored, and what people can do now with even certain small bits and put them all together to make a different picture about you, and access ours or a corporate information, and do bad things with it. And as things open up and we want to make access to our own information and to information amongst each other, and between sharing money, sharing data, sharing all these things that we want to share with one another, and with the greater world, so we can do all this great stuff that we want to do, shop and get fed, personal marketing. All those things make us more accessible to people that want to do bad. And the world's not closing up anytime soon, or getting any more closed as we kind of continue to progress. So,
you think the world is not getting more closed? Do you feel like we're not, so we're doing this in person today, but
digitally.
Okay. Do you have a view on whether the world is going to be more open, and whether we're going to be in rooms of 100 people instead of, first day at 30 people?
Yeah, I have a view.
Would you share the view?
I would imagine this is the last time I see so many people in a room for another year.
You think so?
I think so.
That's depressing as hell, my friend. Thank you very much for that. Maya, are you going to be stuck in the States?
No. Interestingly enough, I'm not sure if anyone's been watching the global issues related to the coronavirus as it relates on the continent, but there's been much less effect across Africa. So I will definitely be back in Lagos. I don't know what's happening elsewhere.
Do you feel safer there medically?
Yes. It's definitely two-sided. If you've survived childhood on the continent, you've got a strong immune system, and I think thus is why the pandemic hasn't really affected. But Nigeria is trying to shut down its economy, and the per capita GDP of Nigeria is 2,000. Between Nigeria, Kenya, Ghana, and Egypt, it's between 2,000 and 3,500. So that's like $2-3 a day. And it's like, they were trying, okay, we're going to shut down all of Nigeria now for coronavirus. And people's like, am I going to die of the COVID virus or the starvation virus? And it's like, okay, I understand. So, we didn't really have a lot of massive shutdowns. In the elite privileged areas where people are not literally making the money they need to eat that daily, like hand to mouth. But in the rest of the population, that's a wild, unfathomable luxury. And having the space to isolate when it's commonplace on the continent to even my family, it's very typical, even regardless of class, to live with your immediate and extended family, whether in a compound, like my grandfather in the village, our whole family lived together in one compound. And so that this idea of isolation and not, working and staying home and working from the internet, I don't understand. So
well, but you do understand, because you grew up in the part of Nigeria called Minnesota.
Yes,
Yeah. Okay.
A small village in Nigeria called Minnesota. Yes, that's.
What state is that, if I may ask? What state?
Yeah,
She grew up in the States.
Yeah.
In Minnesota.
Right. Yeah. No, my dad's
Sorry. My bad. Sorry.
My dad's from Ogun. My mom is from Minnesota. My dad and all of his Minnesota has a great sort of immigration policy for education purposes, and my dad and all of his brothers went to rural Minnesota for higher education, and they all married rural Minnesotan wives.
Nigeria had a 37th state.
And yes, it's been added. Yes.
In a year or two, we might sell you Florida. We can start as a down payment. We'll give you Mar-a-Lago. Just an offer.
How much debt does Mar-a-Lago have?
Not my problem.
How much sanitation needs to happen?
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, from going back to the healthcare concept, as far as developed healthcare sector, there's still a lot of medical tourism. I'd say the majority for those who can afford it is medical tourism. A friend of mine just built the largest hospital by bed, Temi Awagboro. She just built in Lekki, the largest hospital by bed in Nigeria, and it's radically changing. I mean, it's very international quality health facility. But that's still it's exciting because it's a massive market opportunity. But as far as surviving, I'll do it in Nigeria. But getting well, I'll probably do it elsewhere.
That's medical tourism.
Yes.
When you travel to get health care because you're not quite certain.
Yes.
Okay, and can you talk a little bit about how? So you're in New York. What are you doing in New York other than hanging out with these wonderful people?
Yeah, closing my fund, trying to go back to Africa and invest in some startups. So we are we're working to close the raise on our $50 million fund too. And our nonprofit Ingressive for Good is also raising $1 million, and they have about $500,000 to go on that.
Okay, and you raised Fund 1 in 2017.
Yes.
But it
Started the raise in 2017.
I was going to say,
Yeah.
but it took years to raise and close that fund.
Yes.
So are you in the mode of like, I'm always raising? Like every day I raise my fund.
Yeah, so it's been a long time coming. It took us over 2 years to raise Fund 1. But it took us about 2.5 years to raise our $10.2 million Fund 1. It took just like maybe 2-3 months to raise $10 million on Fund 2. So I'm hoping that that's a positive signal that things are changing. But it seems like there's a surplus of well, I don't want to say surplus, but there's been a radical increase in the amount of capital dedicated to VCs this year from an institutional level, as well as Black, minority, whatever that means, and female GPs. So I think this is the right time to be a Black female raising.
And when you raised Fund 1, in 2017, how many venture funds were there in Nigeria?
2017, that were strictly dedicated to tech. There was Echo VC. CRE was, I believe, just formalizing, and there was Singularity, which was like a single family office. And that's really all that I knew about on the continent.
Okay, so what's on the entire continent? I asked about just because CRE is South Africa.
Except South Africa. So those are the ones that I knew actively writing deals in Nigeria.
And so when you're talking to LPs, what's different now? What's landing now? What are LPs reacting to?
People made money, and now it's not just like a nice story of like, oh, Africa could happen someday. Like, let's see. It's like, no, there's returns. There's lots of returns. Andela's major raise, Flutterway's major raise, Paystack's selling, Interswitch's major raise, and we have now practical both M&A, IPOs, Jumia listed on the New York Stock Exchange. Like that's not a fictional story that happened. And Helios Towers listing on the London Stock Exchange last year. You have all these African companies that are publicly listing, so multifaceted liquidity events that have already happened.
And you can still get into the first wave of the first 20, 30 companies that are venture-backed, billion-dollar valuation tech companies on the continent if you are writing checks into those companies today, which is, for me, phenomenally exciting. I don't know why it isn't phenomenally exciting for people who are in the business of taking risk with capital as VCs. But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've been doing this, as you know, before it was cool. So I was actively, I packed up my things, moved to the continent, started the first business at 23 after a year of trying to do business in the US and being like, I gotta go to Nigeria. Like, I can't do anything else. So I've been drinking the Kool-Aid. So I entirely agree with you. And fortunately, the rest of the world is starting to wake up to it as well.
And Kirby, you just completed a fundraise. Congrats. This is Fund 3. What's different in talking to LPs? And just for context, I know a lot of you are not VCs, but how that money goes from LP to VC to founder, actually thinking about how the VCs and LPs are talking about the fundraise, because there's all this money sloshing into venture funds right now, and we see insane levels of activity, which hopefully will be borne out as, like these were in fact legitimate investments, because Tiger Global, for instance, is writing $100 million+ checks every business day of the year, every business day of the year right now, which is something we have not seen a single fund in venture do before this year. So what's different in your conversations with LPs, or is it different?
Especially over this last, year, with so much capital being returned, and like, I think this probably the last 12 months has probably been the best 12 months for venture in probably 20 years, with the public and how much money's been returned. So the shine is on venture. And I remember when we first went out, a lot of people, people didn't want, it wasn't so main street to want to be into venture back in 2012 when we first started and we started pitching to people. But on the other hand, they hadn't had 50 VCs knock on their door and say, hey, do you want to, invest in these really early stage companies? So, so I think there's more access now, and people feel like they have more access to either funds or directly to investments than they did, 10 years ago, 8, 9, 10 years ago. So it changes the story a little bit, but people are, institutions are more willing to put money and make investments than earlier. It makes it a little more difficult when we're talking to individuals, because now they've been hit up multiple times at this point, and they've just seen stuff, and you get an introduction and you start to learn, and you kind of go down a rabbit hole and start putting money to work. A lot of people, we were their gateway drug for a lot of gateway VC to a cadre of people that now invest more heavily into the space. But we were the first people to kind of go out and say, hey, you want to get access to this asset class.
So I'm going to ask you, because Maya's still raising and you're done.
Yeah.
How do we get comfortable that we're not in a buy high, sell low market? In other words, like, have we bid up prices too much? Is there too much money in the system? Are we seeing these over-bloated bets and overfunded companies? Is that going to end poorly? You've already taken the money from the LPs.
Yeah,
they're not listening. Don't worry about it. I'm an LP, but
we're seed investors. So, the difference between the tippy top and the bottom, it's a factor of 2 or 3, but it's the difference between us writing a check at, $4 million and us writing a check at $12 million. At the top, we're writing checks at 12, 15 millions. And in any scenario, a successful exit is going to be, north of several $100 million. So for us, there's, we're just so early, and there's still so much, for lack of a better term, meat on the bone when we invest, that if for a company to work, it's either going to work or it's not. And your returns, there can be some effect. Yeah, it'd be great to be able to write checks into Uber at, $4 million in 2007. But if you wrote a check into Uber at $15 million in 2007, you're still at $35 billion. You're going to be okay. And that. So for early stage funds, you are insulated a little bit. The takeout at that might happen now at $100 million. It's like the company's really not going to work. Somebody just give you $100 million to kind of bring you in. Now that number might be 50, but in a fund it matters, but it's incremental, or it might be 30 or something, or maybe it doesn't happen. But right now, people want to buy companies for a whole host of reasons, because there's not enough talent. So if you're a big company, you want to specialize talent, buying a startup that may not find market fit, but they have a bunch of engineers, they got a bunch of talent, picking them up for some number that makes a decent return for a fund like ours. But for us, those are just icing checks, right? We need the companies to work and to win, and at the exit value that we need.
All right, so the summation is you're in so early that even if someone acqui-hires your companies, that'll return the fund, and then the big ones will return real multiples of the fund.
If things go bad and acqui-hires don't return the fund, or don't have that uptick, you still need companies to win, and that it doesn't. We're in so early.
But the late stage folks are screwed. Could be. Not sure. Okay. And you looked like you were stroking out when he was saying 12 million pre.
We're just closing our 34th investment, and we only have 2 companies where we invested, including follow-on, over a 10 million valuation. So 60% of my deals are at or under 2.5 million. I'm doing a lot of 1 million valued, not check sizes. The valuation of the companies is $1 million. And so then when the exits are happening at 2 to 500 million, that's still a good day for me. That's still VC, that's still VC return. So I was clutching my pearls there for a minute. Wow. 12, 15 million. Whew.
Yeah, Kirby's crazy.
In seed, in this whole pre-seed.
Yeah. No, I like that risk upset you. Meanwhile, you were like, I invested the entire fund in Paystack.
Yes.
Whole fund.
Yeah.
I just told them, give the money to them.
The valuation made sense.
Okay. All right, we have a couple questions.
What's the point at which farmers, especially in Africa, where that's the point where they need the most, like the lower, it's not often that they get the 12 million, right? They need to find the family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's part of our offers. Through Ingressive for Good, our nonprofit work, we're in every major university in Nigeria and 7 other African nations. And we sponsor part of their computer science department. We give computer science scholarships. We give laptops and data. We just gave out 5,000 unlimited Coursera accounts. And so we find the best talent that are just starting companies before they have any local promotion. Talk less of international. Those wild valuation starts happening when they're posted on TechCrunch and then everybody wants them. But we help the guys. We make the early stage investments, and then not only, I mentioned 80% of our LPs run later stage investment vehicles, so we can promote them to our own limited partners and then help them get access to international capital. So that's how we try to help.
So when you say every major university in Nigeria, there are somewhere around 155, 160 ranked universities and colleges in Nigeria. How many of those are you involved in?
Virtually all of them.
Okay, that's coverage.
I'll get the exact number.
I did computer science, and we had 1 computer amongst 300 students. So one of our clients was a big developer repository in the U.S. And for market research, because we realized, Andela, which is a developer, a technical training school in Nigeria, they had 100,000 applications for 150 seats, but this repository company maybe had a few thousand of all of Africa on their platform, and they were like, this doesn't make sense. And so part of our market research, we were going into universities and finding that students were using textbooks from the 80s and writing code on a chalkboard with chalk. And so that's part of the reason that we started Ingressive for Good. It's how are you supposed to graduate and have the technical skills to be put on the job? Because there's a clear dearth of technical talent, but you guys don't have you can't transition rapidly from like writing on with chalk to like, okay, I'm a back end developer and I'm leading the engineering. That doesn't make any sense.
Okay, so 1, then 2. Did you have?
Yeah, I did.
Go ahead.
I had a question around ownership. I was wondering, given this inflated valuations and early stage and advanced rounds, does ownership matter to you and how do you think about it? And I get this thing that if you win big, but still in terms of even the economics of the funds?
Yes, we do think about ownership, and ownership, of course, it does matter. We think of we hope to find founders who also think ownership matters, because we've invested in people who like, you're going to dilute yourself by 40% in your seed round. You probably don't want to do that, and they raise a bunch more, a few more rounds, and everybody's diluted to, and then there are founders who don't want to give up any equity ever, and there's a happy medium between the two that we try to, we want to hit with somebody who cares, protects the equity, but also will raise money and will do stuff, will grow, because a lot of times we find founders who don't want to raise any money, so they're trucking along and they're doing fine, but they're not able to grow at the pace that a fund like ours wants to do. We want you to, we want you to do the impossible every 18 months so you can raise at a higher valuation and do the impossible 1 or 2 or 3 more times to get to a number that makes sense and gives us the kind of returns over the time frame that we want, right?
Do you follow on at all, like in terms of parameter?
Our fund, we tend not to. We tend to, 1, we have a small fund. 2, we are really good at writing a first check, and we're no better at writing the second check. So we do 1 big check, try to get as much ownership as we can up front, and help you in any way we can, and to grow the company and match you up with other investors. So we have, we've been around for 20 years as kind of individuals and 10 years as a fund. So we've developed relationships, throughout the ecosystem to help our founders raise those next rounds of funding.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, in the context of cultural practices, right, that are deep-rooted within the Black and brown communities, we place that in the backdrop against, techlash, right? I mean, I was tweeting the other day about how the first couple of decades of the internet has been about speed, convenience, and consumption of credit. And there's nothing wrong about all of those things. The same thing that, has given the ability for everyone to trade has also caused people to commit suicide because they made a mistake in options trading, right? So there are a lot of blind spots to just singularly celebrating speed, convenience, etc. And I feel that a lot of the cultural practices, or I'll name something specific, Asusu, right, which is the notion of saving with friends and family, right? More people actually save with friends and family than actually do in a formal bank account. And so, as we think about thesis statements that are not necessarily shiny objects, right, what's the thought process around celebrating overlooked cultures and practices by looking at some of those hidden gems, in the way we think about the future and allocate capital?
We will look for founders to bring those to our attention and say, hey, this is something that's happening offline already, and we can make it better, more convenient, and faster online. So saving amongst friends, as a thesis that you brought up. Look, if a founder came to us and said, hey, here's the numbers around saving amongst friends, and here's what we can do with that because it's already it's a pattern that's happening in all these communities. We can make that happen online, and it can be better, faster, easily accessible, and we can bring it to the masses. Do you want to participate in that thesis? We'd definitely be open and excited to have that discussion.
And that's kind of the job of the founder, to tell that story, to bring the data to the conversation, to make it compelling for you. And that ties into a question from Mutabazi in the chat, which is, there's a lot less VC money and funds to serve the large number of startups on the continent. Do we need more Africa-focused VCs on the continent, or more global VCs getting into the continent? Yes and yes. And what should African and what should African founders do?
After my precedents, yes.
What should African founders do to stand out of the crowd for investors like Ingressive?
Great question. I think that, historically, my thesis and what we've been doing, starting with the advisory company and the way we've structured the fund, is that it's necessary to have both. Because the continent is still relatively, what's a nice word for nepotistic? Nepotistic. Okay. The continent is historically, you have to know someone to get in. It's trust-based. It's relationship-based. So in order to get that big major banking contract done, in order to get that regulation, you have to know someone. And so it's necessary to have your local on-ground African investor with local on-ground African connections, which is why the other 20% of our investors run the telecommunications, agriculture, financial services sectors across Nigeria and Greater Africa, acknowledging that it's requisite, to have those relationships. And then also just to be, the ecosystem's moving so rapidly, you can't really understand the next trends from sitting at a desk in Silicon Valley and investing on the continent, or at least you've missed a lot of that opportunity. And so I would say it's necessary to have your pre-seed and seed stage investors have some angel capital or some on-ground venture capital. And then obviously there's still a dearth of institutional growth capital on the continent. And so it's necessary to still have those relationships with international investors who have those really deep pockets and can bring those companies to IPO. And then I wanted to go back to, I got updated data on how many universities we're in. We're in over 200 universities. We have a Ingressive campus ambassador team on 30 universities, but we're in over 200 universities.
Okay, so if you're awestruck by the coverage, so if you're doing the math on the coverage that Ingressive has, and Ingressive has had, as of 2019, Ingressive had one GP, you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
As of 2017.
As of 2019, how many?
Oh, yeah.
Still one.
As in still one.
Still you, yeah.
Still.
Okay. Like we used to say to my daughter, who's the spiller now, because she kept spilling her. She's still the spiller, it's okay. So if you do the math on like, okay, it was a 10-point-something million fund, which, by the way, at the time you had finished the raise in 2019, we believe that was the largest, this is going to be both fantastic and depressing. We believe that was the largest ever fund raised by a solo GP black woman in the world. In the world.
Largest tech fund, yeah, raised by a solo black female.
Terrible and great, right? Both. So how have you, if you take that asset base, how have you been able to get this kind of coverage? Like, do you sleep? Are there little people running around? What's the deal? How big is the team?
Yeah, so all great questions. When we started out, it was a whole me. And then fortunately, there's a 0% chance we would have gotten to where we are if we didn't have the incredible people that have been with the team for years and years. Most of our talent has been with the team at least 4 years, 3 to 4 years. Ayo, Uwem, Echenyo, Carlton, Sean, Blessing. Like, we have so many
incredible team members. And I'm talking about the Ingressive for Good as if I actually work at the organization. I don't. I just set it up and help raise the initial funding and the team. And but the team who runs it have solely been the executors since jump. So Sean and Blessing run the organization together, and they have, I think, about 10 people directly, and then like a couple hundred ambassadors that work under them and do work at different universities. And on the fund side, we are just hiring our 12th member now, and we, over the next few months, will hire 4 more. So if you know a head of HR, a data analyst, or a financial partner.
Located there?
Anywhere. We're all. I have a team member in Australia. We're in Ghana, Kenya, Nigeria. I go between Lagos and the U.S.
No. How big is the Minneapolis team?
My mom receives our mail, so
Is she really?
one person. Mm-hmm. She's great at filing. Yes.
Okay. I didn't know that there was nepotism in the fund. Little disappointed, but we'll let it slide. Feel like that wasn't disclosed when I signed. Okay. Connie, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just want to kind of building on, I guess, the how much more capital is needed on the continent, right? One of the main issues, and you hit on this, is like infrastructure too. A lot of technology actually doesn't work if the infrastructure isn't in place. So I don't know if you can hit on a little bit how does venture capital have to interact with other capital gaps?
Yeah.
Asset? Yeah.
It's interesting because in the U.S. they're looking at it like, you guys don't have roads, and like, what's going on with the healthcare and the government provided services? And I'm like, market opportunities. Like, that's where we're building. And because they're requisite in 0 to 1 technology and like you need them to survive, the retention is really high. So the companies that we're backing are literally taking the place of where the government was supposed to provide services and are fundamental solutions that the populace needs. So like we're working on relatively unsexy, but requisite technology.
Gretchen?
Circling back, you mentioned the Black discount. Is there an even deeper discount for Black female founders?
Yes. Especially, again, the twin bias of who the company's servicing and then who's running the company. So, for companies servicing primarily or targeting a Black female consumer, which is a huge consumer in the country and a huge driver of purchasing in the country. But if you're servicing that consumer, then there's a discount, especially if there's an African American woman kind of running that company.
I mean, we have I mentioned closing our 34th investment. We currently have 40% of our founders are female founded or co-founded. We don't have that issue in our fund. I mean, as far as those who are female founded having significantly lower valuations than the male founded or female co-founded. So I don't know what the world's doing, but I know what I'm doing.
So yes, intersectionality, all intersectionality seems to be a downward pressure on valuation and on access to capital. And I have been really struck by, when I invested in the seed round for Mented, which is a cosmetic company for women with pigmented skin. I want to say that they were the 15th and 16th Black women in America to have raised $1 million or more of venture capital. This was maybe 2016. And then like 3 or 4 years later, I know that there was a company that we invested in, and they were like the 32nd and 33rd Black women in America to have, like, it didn't move, the needle didn't move, and it is still a problem. I looked at a term sheet for a follow-on investment that my wife and I were making in a Black woman-led company on Monday of this week, and these are not terms that VCs are giving to the white dudes. They're just not. and I do think it is a different market. I wouldn't call it a black discount so much as a set of inequitable terms. And that inequitable leverage is the result of a dearth of investors who are in network for black women-led companies. And as an angel investor writing seed checks or pre-seed checks, the biggest risk in every company I personally invest in is, will they get subsequent capital, right? That's the biggest risk. And I know the stats on how much venture funding went to black women-led companies. It rounds to zero every frickin' year. So that's a problem, because I also know what percentage of the US population black women constitute. It does not round to zero, not at all. And in fact, if we look at elections in, say, Georgia, and who voted and how they voted, there's a great argument that black women delivered us from Trump, right? Just in Georgia alone. And so why is there this disparity in the economics? It definitely ripples through into deal terms, it ripples through into follow-on funding, because people also are aware that there are fewer opportunities for those checks. It's fantastic that you're doing what you're doing with women-led companies. But if you look at the reports that Black Women Talk Tech put out, and I would encourage all of you to go to the Black Women Talk Tech Road to Billions conference, which is happening in a couple weeks in August. I've been a board member there for years. It's a fantastic organization. That's going to be a great conference. But if you look at the research that they put out, it just isn't happening, and a lot of black women founders have another job, and they raise a small fraction on average, even when they do raise venture. So it's something that does require work.
Yes, so as a female black founder myself, I could speak to that after being cold pitching over 500 investors in the past year, locking in maybe 40 meetings, fortunate enough to lock in 40 meetings. It's almost as though now we're being heard but not being seen. I feel as though the level at which we need funding is at a much lower probably valuation or like angel pre-seed round. And for someone in my niche like childcare, it's so hot right now and I just cannot wrap my head around not being given an opportunity to succeed.
Well, it's also, and I hate to say this because I'm in the same boat, and I just see a lot of $100 million checks, $50 million checks. And my experience, and I just sort of had the exact same experience as well, and we're going to be a unicorn no matter what over my dead body because I want to be. But, and that's going to happen. But because the checks are so large, there's only so many people cutting those massive checks, and 25,000, 50,000 checks, which we really need. There's so few people cutting those checks.
Yes.
But you're not in the same boat.
Yeah.
She's in a different boat.
Oh.
Right, it's a different boat, but exactly, that's what I'm founding, right? Pivotal, you have your pivotal ventures, I've spoken to all of them. So I feel as though I'm actually set for future rounds, but I can't get there because I'm stuck at the bottom.
Yeah.
Sorry, as someone who invests in diverse founders, the valuations we see all women teams get, at least, and especially all women of color, do not compare to male founder teams. This is a fact supported by PitchBook and Crunchbase data. Just 2.2% of the funding last year went to all women. So it's just not.
It's a massive issue, but also I'm LGBTQ and I'm a gay founder, and so I also know the stats, and I've seen the stats, and they're marginally, and they're similar. So I don't want to ever get into a position, and I'm sorry, I'm empathic, I'm incredibly saying, I feel for you right now, and I want to give you a hug right now. So I also hate the fact that we spend a lot of time saying that we're going after like a micro, like a point, like one ethnicity or one diversity metric got a fraction of a percentage point more than another. No, it's like we're in it together. Like we're all in it together.
Right.
Like we work harder. We're like, it doesn't matter. Like I'll help anyone I possibly can activate a relationship or with my knowledge, and I know we're gonna get there. So I love that we're all in this room together. I love everything that VentureCrush does because we're gonna crush it. Just because we've like gone through so many barriers and gotten through it. And sorry to all the non-diverse people in the room. And because we all have stories and backgrounds, and I always feel like apologizing for that. But I feel for you, and I've walked that walk, and I get it.
Well, see,
Yeah.
so for me, it's not, I don't want people to pity me, right? I actually do have something to offer. And that's what I want to be recognized for, not, right?
Yeah.
Because I have a good product, not out of pity.
Yeah. No, we're not looking to flow philanthropic dollars there.
I'm not looking for an unfair advantage, just a level playing field.
Yeah.
We do that by being successful and proving to the venture funds that we can return the fund many times over. And every time, sorry, this is me like saying that, and I don't know many people in this room, but whenever I've been incredibly successful and gone against all odds, everyone notices. And you return the fund, and everyone that said no to you says, what the hell did you do? And that's how you break the ceiling and you break the barriers.
All right, we had I saw another hand or two. Connie, you want to?
Well, I just, I guess, in like a solution, like the friends and family gap kind of thing is stupid and like a huge part of this problem. So I'm wondering like how we all are looking. I mean, almost you're almost. I don't know. It's a different valuation game. I just can't. Gosh, $2 million valuation. That would be so nice.
Come live in Lagos. Lagos. You understand? We deserve it.
But I mean, yeah. I don't know. Talk a little bit about how y'all look at those earlier than you as kind of your early stage pipeline, maybe a little bit, if you could, and how you can increase the diversity of your pool of underrepresented founders that you have access to who have that early stage capital to get to you, even? I mean, maybe more of a Kirby question. Does that make sense? Like, are you doing anything with angel groups, I guess, or I feel like those tend not to address the problem?
Go ahead.
I mean, for us, any earlier than us is like back in the womb, you know, like, yeah, I mean, we sponsor, computer science degrees, and we have, like I mentioned, dedicating 1,000 scholarships to women exclusively to learn product management and design. And so because it's not as if there are not people who want to learn and want to have access and will break through just given the resources. It's that there's, for whatever reason, being discounted from receiving. And so by creating a whole pool of capital, of funding that goes to, hey, you want to get in technical skills? I'll buy you a laptop. Hey, you want to study this at university? Here's your scholarship. So providing the increase of pipeline by providing the inputs for learning technical skills so people can do whatever they want with that. So that's what we're doing.
So all you're doing is like thousands of scholarships and putting laptops in hundreds of universities.
But education is incredibly
That is a
important.
long way.
No, I'm just saying, like, I don't want to go next. Kirby? No, that's awesome.
We haven't been as intentional as Maya in our. Maya's in a different realm of. She's planting.
We have to. The government's not doing it.
Yeah, exactly. So we kind of access our kind of assets within communities, and we do the interns, and we make ourselves available and accessible. And accessibility, leads to you make yourself accessible to one person that doesn't necessarily have access to people like me, and that access from one person turns into access for their network, right? We try to bridge that as much as we can through just being accessible. and kind of being around and being accessible in a way that, as much as, we love Ed, but trying to get in touch with Ed cold, he might have the capacity and wherewithal to do a whole bunch. But, there's a different community that we can access and that has access to us. And so we've, but yeah, we haven't been as intentional as my.
No one has though, so that's not the standard.
Yeah.
But also making your platforms meritocratic, as in anyone and everyone can apply on our website. And we wanted that because whether you live in Kano or you live in Djibouti or you live wherever you are from, you're applying on the same platform and we're assessing the application the exact same way. So whatever you check, male, female, whatever, wherever from where you're from, the metrics that we're assessing are standardized.
And I know Carolina has a comment next. Yeah. I'm just going to answer it as well, though. So we have, for years, reached out to underrepresented groups, and I mean organizations, to partner with them and to ensure that we were including folks from those groups in our VentureCrush events. It's also what we did with our VentureCrush FG, where we have dozens of companies, and the last pod program was over 100 companies. We had an entire pod on the continent, and Maya helped. We partnered with Ingressive to start VentureCrush Africa so that we could get more flow and connectivity in and on the continent. We've been going out of our way to hire summer associates and junior lawyers who were trained on the continent, who were educated in Nigeria, as lawyers who practice law in Nigeria, so that we can have more connectivity there. I personally have joined a number of organizations and have actually written checks into dozens of startups, as well as dozens of venture funds that are led by underrepresented founders and managers, and it's why Betsy and I, with Teresa Gao, Regina Benjamin, Josh Koppelman, PJ Parson, Annika Sten Parson, and massive help from Carolina, started First Close Partners. And through First Close, we have invested in more than 50 venture funds that are 50% or more owned on a headcount and economics basis by underrepresented VCs, like and including Base and Ingressive. So we hope that that kind of outreach is going to also shift our network and give us better perspective, so that we have a different understanding and a different level of access into deals. And so when Maya mentioned, for instance, Flutterwave and Andela, those are also examples of companies that we've invested in the case of Flutterwave twice, in the case of 54 Gene twice. And that's because we have a diversified network that has given us a different level of access. And we've also done a whole bunch of writing and speaking on these topics so that people will know that we want access and that we want that outreach. And I think that stuff is really important. So, Carolina?
So I have a bunch of reflections from this incredible conversation. So there's a lot, but I think one key point that stood out to me is that there's a huge funding gap, but then there's ecosystem building that has to be done at the same time. So I think what both the speakers and what Ed said is there's about democratizing access, creating programs, that's the ecosystem building, and both of our investors here are institutional. There's a clear funding gap on this friends and family. So what do you do for that? I think we're sometimes, as a former founder, I didn't mention that, having gone out and raised, there are a lot of people, even in our own communities, that are wealthy. And sometimes we don't recognize that. There are a lot of Black billionaires. There are a lot of Latina billionaires. There are a lot of LGBTQ billionaires. And I think it's figuring out how to get access to those people, but also educating sometimes of those people of this particular asset class. So I think what's going to be going on next is there's going to be ecosystem building around this friends and family gap. So definitely look out for that. I know that I will be starting something around that myself.
Which we are excited about. And I would just add that with First Close, we just had a quarterly meeting of our GPs and our LPs, and we have over 100 LPs. A majority of them are underrepresented, which means that the money that we're investing into Ingressive and Base, that money comes from a majority underrepresented set of LPs like Anam, for instance. And we think that's really valuable and important in building community. But taking people who are those examples, so at our last quarterly meeting, which was last week, we had Jose Feliciano and Kwanzaa Jones, who are a black and brown couple. They are billionaires. He started a private equity fund, and they just endowed 2 buildings at Princeton. It's the first time in the 270 whatever year history of that particular stuck-up university that they have had those names on a building. And Kwanzaa in particular was one of the people leading the charge to erase Woodrow Wilson's name from an entire school, the school from which she obtained her degree, because he was, as the Guardian put it, hugely racist, even by the standards of his own time. And that's a really low bar. And so there's something super important about seeing those examples and about holding those examples up, which goes back to what you're saying about, finding those people. And Jose and Kwanzaa have invested personally. They have written checks totaling over $100 million into black and brown led funds, which is extraordinary.
And I remember when we first went out to start raising our first fund, a lot of what we had to do was educate people who could, they had the capital and the capacity to write checks because, many of them did, but writing it into an asset class that is, seen as risky as venture capital, there's an education, especially amongst the black professional class to kind of to save and not, write these checks and to, do real estate. So getting people outside of the kind of cash and real estate mindset and the kind of job mindset and going into get folks to kind of write checks into this long-term, high risk, high reward asset. That education continues, but it's much further down the line than it was, even 10 years ago when we started.
Thought there was another hand. Yeah.
Thank you. So I just wanted to quickly, speak to, investment in Africa, in Nigeria especially. As someone who's lived all of his life in Nigeria, I think there's just a lot of education that needs to be done, even for the, presumably educated people, because you would find that a lot of the wealthy people in Nigeria, for example, they are more comfortable, investing in, conventional sectors like oil and gas. Every wealthy person, in Nigeria wants to invest in oil and gas, or say the traditional banking sector. They all want to invest there because there's a lot of confidence in that sector because these sectors have survived Nigerian system for decades and decades. Yeah, so I think we have to do a lot of education even for that class of persons. So that they can see that going forward, because there are lots of problems in Africa. Lots of problems and lots of opportunities. So most of these problems could actually be solved by technology, and so you just have to put your money where your mouth is. Otherwise, for example, you say you want to invest in oil and gas, but there's a lot of conversation around renewable energies and whatnot. So, I just wanted to quickly point that out. In Nigeria specifically, it's not completely the lack of individuals, high net worth individuals who can invest in these sectors, but because they just don't have the confidence and they do not just understand it yet. That's what you see, investment culture, regulatory culture. They just do not want to try new things. So I wanted to just mention that, and as someone from that part of the world, it's something I'm always happy to jump on, talk about, and see how we can educate these people. Thank you. I think you had a question.
I have a question basically. Essentially, I'm a blind lawyer, and I've been privileged to live in Nigeria and here in the US. And there have been so much talks around inclusion and people that are underrepresented, basically. And if I may ask Kevi and Maya and Ed, possibly, have you guys, or do you guys make conscious efforts to invest in startup founders that are persons with disability?
I'm going to go first. My older sister, who passed away in 2013, was severely disabled, used a wheelchair for her whole life, and I spent my childhood being angry at the way people shunned her and treated her, and watching the small exceptions that the world refused to make for her. So that is something that is deeply ingrained in me and important to me. We have not only funded venture funds that are run by people with disabilities, but we have also funded them when they have come to us from outside the US cold. We did a lot of reference checking, and again, they were capitalistic, not philanthropic investments. We have a fund in Israel that we believe in very, very strongly, where it's called Good Company. And for those of you who've spent a lot of time thinking about things like TVPI, total value per invested dollar, this is a founder of a venture fund who came to us. He and his partner in aggregate have about a 3.5x track record across more than 36 companies. That said, there are very, very, very few venture funds that are owned and run by people with disabilities. There are very few startups that are owned, founded, and run by people with disabilities. And it is absolutely a point that we care profoundly about, and I think it is even overlooked by people who are trying to pursue an investment thesis of inclusion. So I really appreciate you being here and raising it. So thank you.
I'm going to be totally honest. I don't know any. I have not ever received a pitch deck from a disabled African founder, in total honesty. It's something to bring awareness to. I mean, as far as funding, we certainly have people with disabilities in Ingressive for Good who have received sponsorships and support, but I have never actually received a pitch deck.
We're going to fix that.
We haven't made a conscious effort, but we haven't necessarily made a conscious effort to invest in minorities or women or LGBTQ, and we made investments in LGBTQ minorities and women and people with disabilities, but we're just, we try to invest in people of all stripes without bias as best we can.
But you haven't seen companies led by founders with disabilities?
The definition of a disability, I mean, there's how broadly out. I mean, I think we've had one person that was either blind or deaf, but we've had other disabilities that we've invested in, people with other disabilities that might not be deaf or blind, but yeah, we've invested in.
Okay, so I mean, it's clearly something where more effort and awareness is required, and I can't tell you how important I think it is to ask that question, because there's discomfort when you asked it in the room, and the discomfort is because we're not as focused on it as we should be, and so that probably will have an impact, and it would not surprise me if Maya would, for instance, commit to trying to meet with, or have the Ingressive team meet with, at least, say, half a dozen founders with disabilities in the next year for Ingressive?
Yeah.
Will you commit to doing that?
Now.
Okay.
If it's a metric,
I mean, she'll probably start a frickin' fund for it, and but like that's gonna make change right there.
Yeah.
because Maya will do it.
What's also our definition of disability? Is it what you can physically see, or I have an entirely fused spine? Am I disabled? I usually don't identify as that. What would be a qualification for that?
And Ulili is writing in the chat that some founders don't feel comfortable disclosing their disability. You may have met with one and didn't know, and yes, and there's all sorts of neurodivergence. I mean, I don't hide the fact that I have dyslexia and ADHD, but it's not something I walk around announcing, except, right now. But I don't think of that as necessarily, it's a disability, and if you've driven with me, because I can't tell left from right, and that's really bad, especially in the UK, where my family won't allow me to drive. But it's, there are different gradations.
So I run an underrepresented community, and we include students with disabilities. And one problem we've had is it is a much smaller percentage of the community. And when I've talked to people at universities, the career centers about how we can help more of those students. A big problem they mentioned is the students not being comfortable self-identifying. And even though it's completely private, it's the students just don't consider themselves as that, and they don't place themselves in that underrepresented bucket.
And there are 2 black women who run companies that I represent who have done big fundraisers, and they won't announce the fundraising for various reasons. And it's actually really, really important in that instance. These are definitely things that we talked about, because you need examples that people can point to when we can get them. So we are at time. I'd like to welcome those of you who are here in person to stick around for a while and chat. And for those who joined by Zoom, I want to thank you all very much, and I want to thank our VentureCrush team who makes all of these things happen, and really appreciate Maya and Kirby being here. And basically, I did not want to do an in-person event because I'm not ready, and Maya told me to do this, so I did. So thank you, Maya, for doing that. Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.